Welcome to another very special episode of Carlton People. Now, today I've gone into the industry and I've gotten one of Carlton's finest supporters. I've got Mr. Sammy McClure. Sammy, welcome to your Carlton People episode, mate.
TD, very excited. Great to be here.
It's a long time coming, but we are here nonetheless. Listen, let's just get started. Tell us, how did you become a Carlton supporter and where did it all begin?
Yeah. Well, like probably a lot of young boys and girls, I followed my family. So my father was a Carlton supporter. And I actually, when I was about 5, I remember sort of like looking around being like, okay, who should I support? You know, like who's good, who's not good, which players do I like? And I was very quickly told that I actually remember vividly Dad saying, you can barrack for anyone you want. But if you want to live in this house, you barrack for Carlton. So if you want to barrack for the other 15 teams, that's fine. Find somewhere else to live. Here, we barrack for Carlton. So I sort of wasn't given a choice. And then it went from there. You know, like I remember, I wasn't at the game, but I remember the 99 prelim. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing. And then it was actually Dad's 50th birthday in August of 2000, and it was the day we played Melbourne in a semi-final.
Wow!
And we were on the wing, first level, great seats, and we were 26 points up, 24 points up at 3/4 time. And Dad started talking about who we were playing next week, which I think off the top of my head would have been Brisbane. And Brad Green kicked 4 in the last. And I remember crying. I remember walking out of the game crying. And Dad said to me, mate, you're going to see so much success from this footy club in the next 20 years of your life. Don't worry about it. Of course, you know, I mean, he grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, the Carlton heyday when they were just winning flags for fun. And it's one of the only things Dad was wrong about. I haven't seen much success since then. So it's been a tough ride.
It has been a tough ride. It's interesting. I don't remember. I mean, obviously I was alive for 95. I was 8 for 99. I don't really remember it clearly enough to be attached to it. I know that it happened and I've seen the replay and all of that. My memory really just kicks in properly like week to week from like 206, 205 onwards. And You're right. There's been nothing. Nothing's happened.
No, I mean, we had that run in 2011 where we belted Essendon in the first final, and then Andrew Walker was mauled in the goal square against West Coast in the last 10 seconds. Funny how you remember things. Should have won that game against West Coast, and then we would have played Geelong in a prelim, who we had a really good record against. So, but I mean, ifs and buts and maybes in footy. You know, we lost, and not much success since then, which is, you know, sad given that the players that we've had, you know, given the midfield of Jardine, Gibbs and Murphy and, you know, kicking to Fev, and, you know, we had some really, really top line players, but just couldn't get over the line.
Yeah. Let's stay back in your childhood a bit. So what's your first memory, whether it be going to a game or watching a game? How far back do you go?
So I was actually at the 95 flag. I was at the grand final sitting in the top tier. I only have like a flash half-second memory of where I was sitting. I don't remember anything about the game. I couldn't tell you what happened, who played, you know, players-wise. So that's kind of my first memory of footy. But I got taken to the footy quite a lot when I was young. So I was the youngest. I had an older sister who used to come to this footy with me and Dad. And I just have memories of walking into Optus Oval. Back in the days where you used to park on the footy grounds around Optus Oval, it was kind of a free-for-all. It's like just find a park. And if I was lucky, we'd have a little kick before the game. And then, you know, you get in, no reserve seats back then. We were sitting on the wing, on the wooden decks that are still there. And so you'd squeeze in. Dad would take the thermos and he'd always sit me and Maddie, my sister, down and say, wait here. And he'd go back and come back with a couple of buckets of chips and maybe, if we were lucky, like a can of Coke. Mum wasn't there, so I was like, don't tell Mum. And that was kind of it. That was my introduction to footy, was just watching this team in navy blue run around most Saturdays and getting to know the players. And, like these are back in the days when we had, like Ratton was playing, and it was the end of Craig Bradley, and, like the Dean Rice, like some absolute superstars. But I quickly became obsessed with the number 16, Scott Camperelli.
Right.
I don't know why to this day, but there was something about him. I love the way he kicked. Like, I loved how he had this raking right foot. He sort of had an unnatural ball drop where he dropped it out to the right and then hooked it round. And I used to want to kick like that. And like Dad and my footy coaches growing up used to hate and have to straighten me up. And I just wanted to kick like Campo. And so 16, I wore 16 in all my junior footy days, always wanted 16. And then the 16 would follow me and Dad around, like weirdly. We'd be stuck behind a car and the number plate would be 16, or we'd be going to the airport and the flight number was like QF16, or it was uncanny how often it followed us around. And I remember the day that I'm trying to work out the year. It was the year that Woden won the Brownlow. So it might have been 02-ish. I'm so bad with years.
Yeah.
And Dad was covering the Brownlow. He was a journo as well. And all I wanted was an autograph from Scott Camperelli. That's all I wanted. And I don't know if you remember, but like I had a little autograph book. It was navy blue. It had a Carlton symbol on it. Before the days of selfies, obviously.
Yeah.
So I gave him my autograph book, and I was like, all I want is Campo's signature. That's all I want. And he came back, and he had the signature of the Brownlow medalist, like to Sam, like, thanks for supporting me, Shane Woden. And I was like, who's this? It's like the guy that won it. And I was like, I wanted Campo. I don't care about the guy who won it. So I just had this weird obsession with Campo, and to this day, 16 is still my favourite number, which is why I was really excited last week when Jack Carroll debuted, because I've always kind of followed the 16. And 16 was a pretty famous number, wasn't it? Because I think Jeff Buckley would have worn 16, Dylan's dad, who was a gun premiership player back in the 70s and 80s. So, yeah, I've always loved 16. So that was sort of my introduction to Carlton.
Interesting. So we go through, I don't want to touch too much on salary cap era because we know what happened. It happened.
Oh, yeah.
We go in a rut. We have a little bit of a pulse. And at this stage, we're, late teens, early 20s. So we're thinking, all right, prime time. We've gone through the lull. We've experienced the lows. We're going to be up and about. It just stops. 2011 ends up being the peak of that whole team. And then we go through this, I don't know, whatever you call it, this change of coaches and all of that. And I think at this point, you're probably early in your career as a journo. So talk to me a little bit about how did you get to where you are today? What's the early story there?
So I started, I studied journalism, and then the first year of studying, I wanted to try to get a job. So I just rang around radio stations and was looking for work, even if it was unpaid work. And so I got a job basically buying people coffees and food at lunch breaks. And it was great because, they'd literally hand me an envelope of petty cash of a couple $100. And they'd say, just, wait on hand and foot for people. But the best thing was you got to meet people. So the next time they needed someone to, answer the phones, or the next time they needed someone to produce a Sunday show, or, you just kind of gradually work your way up. And then a job was going in the newsroom. And that was perfect because I was coming towards the end of my journalism degree. And so I became a general news journo, and then I moved specifically into sport, and it kind of went from there. And I guess, the older I got, when I say the older I got, when you get to sort of like 25, 26 and you think that you're at the peak of your powers and you know everything about the world and you take yourself seriously. And I was like, I've got to, lessen my alliance to Carlton, sort of not barrack for them. But it's a hard thing to do. I mean, I think I've done pretty well in disassociating myself from stuff that involves work. Sometimes you've got to write hard things that people that the club that you grew up supporting don't like, but that's life. And, I still watch them every week. I think I probably watch them closer than most teams, but I think 99% of people have a team growing up that they support. So,
yeah. Well, first of all, that's actually a nice a nice story for the young ones in the audience who are watching, who want to come up the ranks. And there's a little lesson in that. You've got to be willing to start somewhere, and you've got to be willing to give up your time for free.
Yeah, well, I think that's the question that I most often get. And, I leave my email address on my Instagram profile, which is, as you would know, is private, mainly and I get a lot of questions from kids finishing school or getting into uni asking, where to start, which I find really interesting that we're still not providing the right pathways for young men and women that want to become journos. Like if they're studying a degree, they should be given pathways. But, a lot of them just want to get straight into writing columns, or if they want to get into TV, they want to get straight into being on camera. The best way to start is just somewhere. Don't worry about where you start. Just worry about getting a start.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're in the right environment, you've got good people around you, you'll rise quickly. And if you don't have good people around you, you'll work that out pretty quickly and you'll move somewhere else. But yeah, I think just getting your foot in the door, it's an old adage, but it's an accurate one.
100%. And you touched a little bit on having to, maybe disassociate your passion, not necessarily yourself from the club. Obviously, you write stories, you've written so many over the journey, and you have to become impartial. I think you've done a pretty good job of doing it. Do you still have that little flame though sometimes? Does it take over?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I'm not a good watcher of Carlton. I've gotten better. I'd say I've gotten better, but I probably haven't. I don't know if I've told this story publicly before, but in lockdown, in one of the big lockdowns 18 months ago, we were playing Hawthorn in Perth.
Yep.
And I reckon we were 6 goals up or something.
We absolutely were.
We somehow lost the game. And it was just as, how you feel, everyone who's got a team, who's watched footy, knows that once you feel that pendulum swing of momentum, you just know that you're about to concede a lot of goals on the run. And we just started that. And I think David Cunningham got the ball on the wing and he turned in board when he should have gone down the line. He turned it over and Hawthorn went down the other end and kicked a goal. Anyway, the house I was living at the time, I had this ottoman in front of my couch. So you can see I've got a coffee table at the moment. It used to be a soft ottoman, and I had a rug underneath it. So I used to instead of screaming or yelling, I'm not like a loud watcher. I'd piff my phone into the base of the ottoman and it would land softly on the rug and it would make no sound, right? So my girlfriend at the time, I didn't have to upset her. It was just, anyway, this time when Cunners turned over the footy and they kicked a goal, and I think we went 3 goals down, we're never going to win from there. I stood up as I threw it. I sort of stood up and it hit the fat part of the ottoman on the top and it bounced up, went straight into the middle of the TV and shattered it.
Well, so game over, game's off, TV's ruined.
TV off. And this is in the middle of the lockdown, right? When the only thing you could do is watch TV. And so my girlfriend at the time, Nisha, came down the stairs and just looked at me, looked at the TV and was like, well, you better organise another one quickly, and walked back upstairs. That makes me sound a lot worse than I actually am. But I've got a mate of mine who works at Fox Footy as one of their EPs, their producers, Sam Daddo. He had never watched me at a Carlton game before until a couple of years ago. And then he went with me. And 5 minutes in, he was just like, I didn't realise you were full psycho. I don't yell. I'm just I have my jacket over my face and oh my God. I hate being at Carlton games. It just makes me nervous. If I shudder to think about if they play in a prelim or God forbid a grand final, I don't even know if I could go. I have done well disassociating myself, particularly during the week. I think I'm pretty fair and reasonable around Carlton and talking about them and players and coaches, and I've got really good relationships as a club. But when the ball is bounced and I'm at the ground, I just get weird. I think most people would probably resonate with them about their teams. People 100%. Watch footy in different ways.
It takes over. And I think that's kind of what makes Carlton the beautiful club that it is. We have a fan base. I mean, everyone's passionate. I think Carlton are one of the few teams where it just gets people on another level.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like Carlton and Richmond, I feel like that's not paying disrespect to Collingwood and Essendon because they're probably similar, but it feels like Carlton and Richmond, their supporters are like a special sort of connected. They're almost interwoven into what happens at the club.
Absolutely. So what do you make of the industry? I mean, from when you've started to now, we've had the explosion of, social media. You hear talking on a YouTube channel. We've got fan-made content starting to really pop off. How are you seeing the change in what's happening?
Yeah, I've spoken a little bit about this before. I find it really fascinating, obviously, because I work in the industry. But I think we've got into a bit of a nasty position just because there's so much content now. And there seem to be so many different opinions flying around that it's not necessarily aligned to what the reality is of what's going on in the game. And so I feel like we're constantly jumping at shadows a little bit. And I've joked with the guy I do radio with, Jared Healy. I've joked several times that one night I'm just going to come on and just make up a story and just see what happens and see how many people go with it instead of checking. Because, I feel like, geez, I'm only 30, but when I talk about back in the day, I sound like an idiot. But back when I started, if someone reported something, my boss always used to teach me that, okay, well, you have to go and get it from 2 of your own sources before you can stand that story up. And that would take, however long it took. It could take hours, it could take a day. And if not, well, you don't have it. And if it was a really, really big story, something like the Essendon supplement saga, and you didn't have it, well, then you say, okay, the Herald Sun is reporting that. You'd have to source it properly. Now it's kind of a free-for-all. So I sort of empathize and I understand why players get frustrated with the media. I actually don't think that it's not that players don't want to be involved in the media. Because if you go to them directly, 90% of them say, yeah, I'll come on or I'll do that interview or, yeah, happy to chat. It's more that they don't necessarily have trust that whatever gets said isn't redistributed and transposed into something completely different or out of context. Because we all seem to be looking for that next edge. So I'm just waiting for the time in the industry. It might be 5 years, it might be 50, where we kind of have enough of the sugar high, we burn ourselves out, and then we go back to, newspapers saying, well, instead of printing 8 pages of sport a day, we're just going to print 3 and we're going to concentrate on creating our own content that's meaningful to our readers. Now, that's hard because it means that newspapers and TV stations and radio stations are all going to probably have to make less money. So it's going to take someone standing up to say, actually, I'm happy to take less out of the bottom line and our quality goes up. Because at the moment, I don't think we prioritize quality in the industry. And that's, that hurts me to say it because it's someone that works in it every day. But yeah, if you want to have an honest conversation about where we're at, we have to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because what once was, the distribution platform for news and whatnot was the industry, the Herald Sun and etc. We move into this era now where anyone really can start a podcast, can start a website, can build whatever and build a following and get anything really out there. And they're not under any strict professional guidelines. This channel is a great example. Like, can really say whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, but I obviously try and keep some sort of level of professionalism about it. But yeah, I just find the distribution of everything now, not just footy content, but anything. It's everyone's got the power to do it now. It's a really interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, and because of that, we've all changed the way we approach interviews and news and stories. So the guy who produces our show on 3AW, Lawrence Rosen, who's an absolute star, he's in his mid-20s and he's going to be a Jet. Jared and I talked to him a lot about he's kind of grown up in a different realm of the media to what I did, and I different from Jared. But, we talk about if we've got a player on who's, say, out of contract, we have him on in April, it's okay not to ask him about his contract. Yeah. We don't have to be looking for that moment where it's like, oh, well, this player says he's not sure about his contract. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't. At some stage, someone like a Josh Dunkley who's out of contract, who's previously tried to leave to go to another club. Like that, contextually, that makes sense. But I think as an industry, we just have to take a step back and think about what do we owe to the people who are engaging with our content. You know, Caroline Wilson always used to say to me, the only two people you are answerable to are your editor and your readers. And so you have to do what's in the best interests of them. Yeah. And if it requires asking a really hard question because we need to, fine. If it requires letting a ball go outside off stump because you don't necessarily need to play at that, to use the cricket analogy, that's okay as well.
Interesting. Let's come back to the Blues because the rebuild happens 2015-16. We cut the list. We have
how many rebuilds?
I know. We don't get a pulse really until right now, where we're talking prior to round 8, and there's a little bit of a show of a sign of improvement. Maybe let's start high level. What have you made of the group and where it's at and where it's going on its journey?
Yeah, I think they're going really well. I think Michael Voss has been a breath of fresh air. I think the players, from what I've understood, have taken more ownership of their own form, both individually, but also, cognizant of what they're able to achieve as a group. And I think you can see that from the leadership of someone like a Cripps, this is a guy that has constantly tried to change his body shape to make himself the best version of himself for his team. I mean, he's one of the most selfless footballers that I've ever seen. And not a lot of people might see that unless you're talking to people behind the scenes. But, he has clicked into a different gear this year. And it's not, he might end up winning the Brownlow, but you can see he's not doing it for himself. He's now doing stuff that a little bit like what Trent Cotchin did a few years ago, when he stopped worrying about having 30 touches and started just worrying about what was the best version he could be for the team. I think Carlton have just started to understand that, and they're winning now games that they otherwise would have lost. That Port game, they would have been rolled over the top. The Hawthorn game, they would have lost as well in previous years. So, I think they've taken a really good step forwards. Administratively, I just think they're a lot more stable. I know you've had Brian Cook on the show recently. I think he's been a really good asset for the club just to come in and just oversee a situation that he's been in several times before. Now, that's nothing against Kane Little. Kane Little did unbelievable things for the club commercially. He signed Virgin and Puma to 10-year deals. Not many CEOs could say that about their clubs. But the Brendan Bolton thing just didn't work out, and he had blood on his hands because of it. And the David Teague thing didn't work out. So, there was just some ownership that needed to be taken. And unfortunately, it's resulted in some people leaving the club. But as we've always said in sport, the club is bigger than any one individual. And I think Carlton have just started to tick over into that. Are they going to win a flag soon? Well, who knows? Flags are hard to win, but I think they're a different footy club to where they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. The difference in terms of just watching them from the eye test, I mean, there's probably stats to back it up, but from the eye test as a fan, you go there, you just see they're a lot more locked in. We review every single second of every game here on the channel. Last year you go through every one of the reviews. It's just like you pinpoint every little moment where you're like, what's going on? And, we've been through a serious journey. We've got a documentation of the whole lot. So it's fascinating to see, even now that we're winning. I mean, right now we're sitting 5-2. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but people I sense are still holding on to the past and they don't quite trust it just yet. And look,
definitely.
And fair enough.
Definitely. I mean, you've seen what's happened with Melbourne fans. I mean, I remember Melbourne fans last year were just, still not convinced. It's like, guys, you're first on the ladder and you're 16-3. Like, what are you talking about? Oh no, we still might. It's just they've been through such torture, like a lot of Carlton fans have. It's going to take more than 5-2 to regain the trust. But look, the players look like they're enjoying themselves. Michael Voss seems to handle himself in every situation beautifully. He's been to hell and back in his journey as a coach with what happened at Brisbane. So he's better for it. And they're just in a good place. They just need to worry about putting one foot in front of the other every week, being consistent. They're going to lose games. They're going to win games. And see, what their best is going to be, because you've seen flashes of their best, I reckon, this year.
Yeah.
And they're going to be a pretty scary team if they can raise the level of their worst and just, decrease that gap, as all the best teams always talk about, the difference between your best and your worst.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an affinity to a particular player or players? Like, do you have your favourites?
Yeah, I've always been looking for my next Campo.
Okay.
It was Fev for a while. I started wanting to wear the 25 and wanting to hold the ball low in my right hand and high in my left hand like he used to. But since then, I haven't really found one. I mean, there's so many players that I like and admire, but I'm still looking for that next one that kind of grabs me. And I think to myself, I've got to watch him. I mean, the closest I've come is Charlie Curnow before he got injured, because he was just doing things I'd never seen anyone else do before. And, I mean, you look at Charlie, he's probably playing at 50% of his ability at the moment. And that's a great thing, because he's building back up. The injuries that he's had have tortured him. And so he's building up resilience physically, mentally, emotionally. He still has these flashes of just insane brilliance. So if he starts playing more footy consistently just to get his body right, he'll probably be the one I have the closest affinity to, I reckon.
Okay, I like it. Final question. Everyone gets the same question on this series. You've got to look into the crystal ball, and you've got to give me a year where this group hold up that Premiership Cup. When's it going to be?
What are we, 2022?
We're 2022. When we started this, a lot of people were saying 2022. This was a couple of years back, so we're going to have to readjust.
I actually think if they win one, it'll be sooner rather than later. So I'm going to say 2024.
Okay.
I was going to say 5, but 5's a fair way away. A lot can change in footy clubs in that period. Their good players are good now. Walsh could get better. Hard to see Cripps getting better. Mackay could get a little better in the next 2 years. Curnow could definitely get a little better. Wiedering could get a little better. Yeah, so I'm going to say 24.
Do you subscribe to the theory that you've got to go through the devastating loss in finals in order to come back and win a flag? I know that the Dogs have done it. No,
I don't. It's a good theory, and the statistics will probably add to it. But I think now, because of how even the competition's become, a lot of those teams went through that because they'd say limp into 7th or 8th and get belted by whoever was 5th or 6th, because the difference was so big in those sections. Whereas now, outside of Melbourne and maybe, say, Brisbane, there's kind of 10 teams that I reckon could beat each other on any given day. Maybe even more, maybe even 12. So, yeah, I don't necessarily subscribe to it. I personally don't think Carlton can win the flag this year. Having said that, if Melbourne weren't Melbourne, I'd say to you, well, why can't they win it this year? I just don't think they're anywhere near Melbourne at the moment. And I think in a big final, Melbourne will prove that. But, yeah, I mean, could Carlton make a prelim? I wouldn't sit here and bet against it. I think they're, behind Brisbane and potentially behind Freo in Sydney. I mean, it wasn't long ago that Freo kind of pantsed them. So they're in the best 6 teams in the comp. So why can't they go deep into a final series this year? I just don't think they can win it.
Yeah, fair. Well, I yearn for the day that we're lining up to get into the MCG finals time, finals footy, the Raw.
I won't be able to. I'll hate every second of it.
Love it. Sammy, it has been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks so much for your time.
Great stuff, Terry.